Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
A very good morning and welcome to all of you to the inaugural session of the 13th All India Conference of China Studies. The special theme that the conference will focus on this year is China at Crossroads, New Directions in Politics, Environment and Economy. The IIT Madras China Studies Center is the proud co-host of this year's conference with the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi that has convened this annually for over a decade. We hope that the next 3 days of academic discussion and engagement would be useful to all stakeholders and look forward to your participation in the sessions that follow. With economic reform and opening up, there has been a diversification of political expression in China. And although the unfinished character of the economic and social project of China's growth make definitive conclusions a risky proposition, the perceived sense of impenetrability has certainly lowered for students over the last 2 decades compared to earlier years. This has allowed research to expand and incorporate agendas covering the study of society, of course, economy, institutional reforms, environment, beyond just elite politics, foreign policy in itself. The papers at this year's All India Conference of China Studies are reflective of these changes. Let me begin the inaugural session by inviting Ambassador Ashok Kantha, Director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, for the welcome remarks. A career diplomat, Ambassador Kantha was India's ambassador to China until January 2016. Prior to this, he was Secretary East at the Ministry of External Affairs. His previous assignments include being High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka and Malaysia and Consul General in Hong Kong, apart from serving in different capacities at Indian missions in Singapore, China, and the United States, in a diplomatic career spanning over 38 years. Over to you, Ambassador Kantha.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for that introduction. Dr. S. Jaishankar, Honorable Minister, External Affairs, will be joining us shortly. Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, Director, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. Professor Srimati Chakrabarti, Vice Chairperson, Institute of Chinese Studies and convener of 13th AICCS, Dr. Joe Thomas Karakatu, in charge of IIT Madras China Studies Center and co-convener 13th AICCS, senior academics and young scholars present here virtually, ladies and gentlemen. I warmly welcome you all to the 13th edition of the All India Conference on China Studies, being held digitally this year and co-hosted by the Institute of Chinese Studies and the China Studies Center of IIT Madras. It's an honor that the keynote address today is being delivered by Dr. S. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister and leading foreign policy strategist of the country. His long years of experience in engagement with China will add significant value to the AICCS this year. He'll join us shortly. Friends, the 13th AICCS carries forward the effort to bring together China scholars, explore new China studies, and deliberate on the emerging areas of research. During this edition, we have 11 sessions with thought leaders and upcoming scholars over 30 universities and research institutes in India and abroad participating as chairs, speakers, and discussants. Let me once again welcome all speakers, panelists, discussants, and other participants who will share the research and knowledge at various panels over the next 3 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Kantha. Let me now invite Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, Director of the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras since 2011. Among other honors, Professor Ramamurthy is a fellow with the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers in New York and the Indian National Academy of Engineering. His research specialization is on modulation and coding for mobile communications, wireless communication networks, design and implementation of wireless local loop systems. Professor Ramamurthy was honored with the Doyens of Madras Award by the government of Tamil Nadu in 2014. Professor Ramamurthy has a BTech in electronics from IIT Madras and an MS and PhD in electrical engineering from the University of California at Santa Barbara. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Joe, and good morning to everyone who have assembled across the country and maybe other parts of the world for this conference. Let me begin by saying that IIT Madras China Studies Center and IIT Madras as a whole is proud to be co-hosting this conference. We are a very small speck in the firmament of China Studies in India, which itself I think is fairly modest effort compared to global scale efforts on such matters. But nevertheless, we are serious about it and we are very happy to be co-hosting this conference. I'm also very, very honored that we have today Ambassador Kanta to give the keynote, very learned professor to speak to us, to give the inaugural lecture in this session. And also we wait for Dr. Jaishankar to give his address. I also see on the side screen Professor Ambassador Ranganathan, who has guided us in the initial years when we set up the center. And so my thanks to everybody for helping us get to where we are, and we have a long way to go. I wanted to just share that among the various things that we have to focus on with regard to China, particularly from the Indian point of view, Indian vantage point, is how do the Chinese go about technology in the areas of technology and business, particularly the area of core information and communication technology. This is becoming a very important part of the entire technology landscape. Of course, there are many important technologies, but this is becoming a very important one. And the Chinese have recognized this too, as you all know, in their plan for 2025 and so on. So how are they going about this? And this is very important to understand because we all know what are the implications of the Chinese, juggernaut, if you might say, in the areas of technology and business to many countries, for implications for trade, implications for national security, implications for their own economies, and particularly in India, because we have had a very, very strong trade with China in certain areas, particularly in information and communication technology, with a huge net import and huge dependence also till now. In this context, I want to share that that there are some things that the Chinese do very differently. There are some strengths that they inherently have, which they obviously play to. There appear to be some strengths that are, and one of the interesting questions is: are these strengths unique to them, or some of them can be actually, built by others too? For example, in India. And the question then is, how does one go about dealing with them as competitors, because economy and technology and business is a competitive business. And it's therefore very important to study. And my own, I may be wrong in this, but my feeling is that we really don't understand this as well as we should. Let me just share very quickly my own personal experience. It was mentioned in that when I was introduced that I was involved in earlier years in building what's called a wireless local loop systems. Wireless local loop is a precursor to the mobile telephony system. Now that we have the mobile systems, wireless local loops don't make any sense. They're essentially systems in which you had a telephone in your home and a data connection without a wire coming to your home, but it wasn't mobile. Okay. And when we built it in the 90s, we had one of the probably, really competitive technologies in the world. And we had done it jointly with an American multinational, which made all the semiconductors for this. And because of that, the Chinese were very interested in this technology. And actually, I was one of the three main PIs for the system and development. And I had hosted Huawei actually at IIT Madras actually. They came to evaluate the technology. I had hosted Huawei, and I visited Huawei also after that. We also actually transferred the technology to a state-owned enterprise called Factory 738 in outside Beijing. I took a team there and spent nearly 3 weeks doing the handoff. So I had a lot of personal insights into what they do and what they don't do. I was also the single point window for all transactions, all communications with them on email, and I learned so much. I've still got all of that record in case anybody's interested. I've learned so much on how you deal with them and what you shouldn't do and what you should do. So it's very interesting. I mean, they're very different. We also dealt with the American multinational, for example, in that same time frame, and of course, maybe because I studied in the US and so on, there was nothing that I learned in that exercise that I didn't know already. But that wasn't true when when we dealt with the Chinese. I don't want to get into the details here. This is not the forum for it. But I think there's a lot to understand. And I've subsequently had discussions, even in our China Studies Center Advisory Council, we have people who have set up factories in China. And then there are so many others now. If you look at, there are Indian companies which have done manufacturing, they're doing manufacturing of smartphones and so on with a lot of components and technology from China and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of knowledge, but we haven't really picked up everything, understood what is the machinery behind how they work. And it's very important to understand this, because that will actually enable us to figure out what are the things that they do, which is very, very unique and very plays to their strengths, and which we can, and some things we cannot do, because we operate under different rules and norms. We cannot do everything that they do. So which are those things that we cannot? And then we have to then evolve our strategies accordingly. And there are other things we can do which they can't. So those are I think this is an area that we probably need to focus on even more. It has huge implications going forward. And I, for example, just want to share with you that after my visit to Huawei, I remember coming back and telling my colleagues that there's no way we can transfer technology to them, and there's no way we can compete with them. I could already see in 1997 or 6 where they were headed, and that we were nowhere. We had no vision of that kind. So it was very, very clear to me. At that time, I don't think anybody in India knew what Huawei stood for, but it was very clear to me. On the other hand, I had nobody to share it with except over cup of tea and coffee with my colleagues as chai pani talk. So really, we need to understand, and there are people who have gone and who have now done manufacturing deals with them, have done trading deals with them, all kinds of things. But I don't think we really have gone about systematically understanding how the Chinese technology and business mind works. So I hope I've been encouraging my colleagues at IIT Madras to focus on that, to work with our engineering faculty who have some exposure. There are at least 3-4 of us here who have a lot of exposure in different ways, but there are others outside. And I know it's too much. Even if we did it, it is too much for us to do. I hope that there are others who are interested. We'd be very happy to work with other scholars on this. We'd be happy to host PhD scholars who maybe even career diplomats or whatever, working in other places part-time. Because these are on topics like this, I think there's a lot of work to be done. With that, I'd like to conclude my small talk in this conference. I wish the conference all success, and I hope that we make breaks more ground in trying to comprehend this neighbor of ours with whom we have to learn how to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Ramamurthy. Let me now invite Professor Srimati Chakrabarti for the convener's remarks. Professor Chakrabarti is Vice Chairperson of the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi and convener of the 13th All India Conference of China Studies. She is the editor of the China Report Journal. She was Professor of Chinese Studies and head of the Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Delhi. She's been an honorary fellow of the Institute of Chinese Studies since 2003. Professor Chakrabarti has a PhD in political science from Columbia University and holds master's degrees from Delhi University and Harvard University. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Joe. Honorable Minister for External Affairs, Mr. Jaishankar, our keynote speaker for today. Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthy, Director, IIT Madras. Ambassador Ashok Kantha, Director, Institute of Chinese Studies. Dr. Thomas Karakattu, co-convener of the 13th AICCS and faculty member of IIT Madras. Friends, colleagues, students, and all participants attending the inaugural function of the 13th All India Conference of China Studies. First, let me welcome you all and also express my thanks to all of you for being part of this event. The 13th AICCS was initially planned to be held in 2020, but due to reasons known to all, could not be held on time. The fact that we can still hold it only a couple of months late is a matter of great happiness for us. Holding an event as big as this completely online has its own challenges, but I hope we will be able to overcome those and make the conference as successful this year as it has been in the previous years. Each year we have chosen a different theme for the conference, and every time the response has been very impressive, particularly from young scholars. Our main objective of holding this annual event is to take China studies to the whole country and not let it remain Delhi-centric. However, this year is a very special one for us because we have none other than the Honorable Minister for External Affairs as our keynote speaker. As known to everyone, Mr. Jaishankar is himself a China expert. We therefore really look forward to his address. Also, this gives me an opportunity to thank the Ministry of External Affairs for supporting the Institute of Chinese Studies since its inception. The level which ICS has reached today would never have been possible without the MEA's support and cooperation. We will always remain grateful. Tata Trust has also been a great support to us, and we have been helped by other private entities like the Firozshah Godrej Foundation, the Jamnal Bajaj Foundation, the VP Dutt Gargi Dutt Foundation, among others. At the end of this 3-day event, as always, there will be a vote of thanks, and all those who have helped us in organizing this conference will be thanked. But from my side, I wish to express gratitude to our collaborators, IIT Madras Chennai, for joining hands with us, thereby adding to the prestige of this conference. Here I end my remarks, and I once again welcome you all to the 13th AICCS. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chakraborty. Ambassador Kanta, do we have Honorable Dr. S. Jaishankar with us?
We'll just check.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, I am very much here.
Yeah.
Good morning, sir. Let me extend a warm welcome to Honorable Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's Minister of External Affairs. He doesn't need an introduction, but I must add that he was President of Global Corporate Affairs at Tata Sons before taking up his current position. Among the positions he has held in his diplomatic career, he has served as India's Foreign Secretary from 2015 to 2018. He was India's ambassador to the United States from 2013 to 2015, India's ambassador to China from 2009 to 2013, in a long and distinguished diplomatic career. Dr. Jaishankar is a graduate of St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and has advanced degrees in international relations from Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was honored with the Padma Shri Award in 2019. Let me now request Ambassador Kanta to formally welcome Dr. S. Jaishankar to deliver the keynote address.
Thank you, Joe. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs and leading foreign policy thinker of the country. With comprehensive understanding of the geopolitical and geoeconomic shifts taking place today, Dr. Jaishankar converges long-term strategy direction with practical actions on the ground. India's standing in the world is much enhanced under his diplomatic leadership. Through his formidable expertise on China, including as the longest-serving Indian ambassador to that country, Minister Jaishankar is best positioned to lead in fostering next-level programs for meaningful research on China. As I mentioned in my welcome report, and expect that MEA will play an active role in taking China's studies to the next level. We look forward to keynote remarks by Dr. Jaishankar. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Ashok Kant, Professor Ramamurthy, Professor Srimati Chakraborty, dear friends. I am very glad to join you today at the commencement of the 13th All India Conference of China Studies. At the outset, let me express my appreciation to the Institute of Chinese Studies and IIT Madras China Studies Center, whose collaboration has made that possible. I would, of course, particularly like to recognize my dear friend and colleague, Ambassador Ashok Kant, with whom I started in this ministry many years ago, who has obviously been very much the moving spirit behind this event. And I wish you all a very, very productive discussion in the days ahead. Now, over the course of these 3 days, I gather that you will be discussing China studies from different perspectives. This will include developments within China, matters pertaining to India-China relations, obviously, China's ties with the rest of the world, and our own understanding of that society. Now, these deliberations will be academic in large part, but policy oriented in some respects, perhaps sometimes both at the same time. There is no question that we need to invest more deeply in the study of China. Its salience in the global order is self-evident, and recent decades, if anything, have only heightened that prominence. That it is a proximate neighbor of India only makes stronger studies an even more compelling case. The two nations, of course, have some similarities, especially of size and of history. But they're also a very interesting contrast in many ways, whether you think of it culturally, politically, or economically. Both are in the process of building a modern nation state from a civilizational society. And their parallel rise in the contemporary era, albeit at a differential pace and intensity, that is actually a relatively unique happening in human history. In short, there is much for all of you to research, to reflect on, and to assess in this particular domain. Now, from a policy perspective, it is naturally to our advantage that there is solid expertise on China in India. Indeed, this very assumption has led us in the Ministry of External Affairs to set up a dedicated study center on China. But that said, let me also accept that there is something much broader than a strategic requirement. As both India and China have grown in recent decades, it was inevitable that we would have much more to do with each other. We have seen that expressed in trade and in finance, in tourism and culture, and indeed, as we are seeing just now, in think tanks and the academia as well. Exchanges in all domains are obviously facilitated by a more informed understanding of the polity and society with which we are dealing. But while policy itself may benefit from a wider pool of expertise and talent, it is equally necessary that the world of China studies also has a sound grasp of policy. After all, by defining opportunities and challenges clearly, that will not only influence your insights, but perhaps even help shape better your own expectations. Now, all of you are familiar with the modern history of our bilateral ties. Now, perhaps not everyone may know every nuance of how they evolved, but I think generally people have a sense of the difficulties as well as the development of this relationship. After the 1962 conflict, we exchanged ambassadors only in 1976. The first prime ministerial visit to China after 1954 actually happened only in 1988. And indeed, the rebuilding of our ties was actually a very painstaking and arduous endeavor. Now, this, if you think about it, this is something of a paradox because do remember that India was among the early nations to actually recognize the People's Republic of China. So what you can see is that the quality of our ties in many ways was impacted both by the border conflict and the lost decades thereafter. And it is, so in many ways we had to kind of orchestrate a sense of recovery thereafter. Now, there's also a strategic explanation for this, given how close China was, in contrast to India, I should add, to the West in this period. Nevertheless, for the last 3 decades, interactions and exchanges grew steadily in many areas. China became one of our largest trading partners, a very significant source of investment, even of technology, a participant in projects and infrastructure building, and a very substantial destination for tourism and education. As for the border areas, a complex but practical set of understandings and agreements focused on their management, even as negotiations were conducted on the boundary dispute. The advancement of ties in this period was clearly predicated on ensuring that peace and tranquility was not disturbed, and that the line of actual control was both observed and respected by both sides. For this reason, it was explicitly agreed that the 2 countries would refrain from massing troops on their common border. Not just that, there were subsequently detailed understandings on handling situations of friction if they were to arise, and I think there's nobody better than Ambassador Kant to talk on this matter. In the years that passed, we obviously did not see significant progress on arriving at a common understanding of the alignment of the LAC in the India-China border areas. But at the same time, there was also increasing construction of border infrastructure, especially on the Chinese side. Since 2014, there may have been more efforts by India to reduce this very considerable gap, including greater budget commitments and a better road building record. Nevertheless, the infrastructure differential remains significant and, as we saw last year, consequential. Now, for all the differences and disagreements that we may have had on the boundary, the central fact was that border areas still remained fundamentally peaceful. The last loss of life before 2020 was, in fact, as far back as 1975. That is why the events in eastern Ladakh last year have so profoundly disturbed the relationship. Because they not only signaled a disregard for commitments about minimizing troop levels, but also showed a willingness to breach peace and tranquility. Especially to an audience like yours that is so focused on China, I don't really have to remind you what impact this has had on both public and political opinion in our country. Significantly, to date, we have yet to receive a credible explanation for the change in China's stance or reasons for massing of troops in border areas. It is a different matter, of course, that the issue before us is what the Chinese posture signals, how it evolves, and what implications it may have for the future of our ties. Even before 2020, the India-China relationship witnessed decisions and events that reflected the duality of cooperation and competition. We saw trade grow dramatically, though its one-sided nature made it increasingly controversial. In sectors like power and telecom, Chinese companies obtained access to the Indian market. The number of Indian students in China grew, as indeed did Indian tourists who visited there. In the global arena, we made common cause on some developmental and economic issues. Our common membership of plurilateral groups was also a meeting point. Yet, when it came to interests and aspirations, some of the divergences were also apparent. You may recall the practice of staple visas or the reluctance to deal with some of our military commands. Then there was China's opposition to India's membership of the Nuclear Supplies Group and to a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. When it came to trade, promises of market access did not match delivery. The blocking of UN listing of Pakistani terrorists involved in attacks on India had its own resonance. And of course, the violation of Indian sovereignty by the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Even the border area saw frictions on some occasions. And as the cumulative impact of all these developments began to be felt, the two nations actually agreed at Astana in 2017 not to allow differences to become disputes. At the same time, they also endeavored to enhance the factors of stability in the relationship. Subsequent summits were largely in that direction and in fact affirmed that very consensus. But far from mitigating differences, the events of 2020 have actually put our relationship under exceptional stress. Given the gravity of the matter, it is natural that those who study China will be concerned about where our relationship is headed. And I really don't have a definitive answer to offer at this point in time. Whether it is our immediate concerns or more distant prospects, the fact is that the development of our ties can only be based on mutuality. Indeed, the three mutuals, mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, and mutual interest, are its determining factors. Any expectation that they can be brushed aside and that life can carry on undisturbed despite the situation at the border, that's simply not realistic. There are discussions underway through various mechanisms on disengagement at the border areas. But if ties are to steady and progress, policies must take into account the learnings of the last 3 decades. Experience of the past taught us the importance of stabilizing our relationship even while adjusting to changes. From that, we can seek proper guidance that will be to the benefit of both nations. Now, these can be summed up by 8 broad propositions. First and foremost, agreements already reached must be adhered to in their entirety, both in letter and spirit. Second, where the handling of the border areas are concerned, the LAC must be strictly observed and respected. Any attempt to unilaterally change the status quo is completely unacceptable. Third, peace and tranquility in the border areas is the basis for development of relations in other domains. If they are disturbed, so inevitably will the rest of the relationship. Now, this is quite apart from the issue of progress in the boundary negotiations. Fourth, while both nations are committed to a multipolar world, there should be a recognition that a multipolar Asia is one of its essential constituents. Fifth, obviously, each state will have its own interests, concerns, and priorities, but sensitivity to them cannot be one-sided. At the end of the day, relationships between major states are reciprocal in nature. Sixth, as rising powers, each will have their own set of aspirations and their pursuit too cannot be ignored. Seventh, there will always be divergences and differences, but their management is essential to our ties. And eighth, civilizational states like India and China must always take the long view. It has often been said that the ability of India and China to work together will determine the Asian century. At this time, it is equally important to recognize that the difficulties in doing so may well undermine it. The India-China relationship is today truly at a crossroads. Choices that are made will have profound repercussions, not just for the two nations, but for the entire world. Respecting the three mutuals and observing those 8 propositions, those 8 principles that I spoke about, they will surely help us make the right decisions. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. And I really wish you a very, very productive conference.
Thank you, Dr. Jaishankar, for the keynote address.